All right, guys, welcome. Before we get started, I just want to express a huge thank you for spending some time with us here today. My name is Gabriel Gravelis. I'm the marketing director at Decisive Data. And the fact that you've expressed some interest in data analytics to be with us today means a lot to us. We've actually experienced a very large demand for this subject matter, and it exceeded our expectations. And so spending an hour with us today, we know everybody is busy, and it means the world to us. So thank you very much. On today's webinar, we have a mix of attendees. About 80% of the people who are on board with us today are from the senior living communities. And about 20% of the attendees are on the property management side, in the commercial real estate side. And what we've noticed is that both industries have a very high demand to understand how to use their occupancy data in order to maximize revenue. And so that is why we have both sets of participants here today. So our agenda. Today, we are going to spend about 45 minutes. We want to keep this under 45 minutes. And to start off, I will talk to you a little bit about Decisive Data. I understand that this is our first time communicating with one another, and I'd like to present just a little bit of background on who we are and what we do. And after that, we'll talk about a case study that we've put together in the senior living industry. We'll talk about a trade show that we'll be exhibiting at later this year. Then I'll introduce the presenters. And after the presentations, we'll have a question and answering session. So before we get started, just a little bit of housekeeping. One, we are using zoom.us. That is our webinar platform. Everybody is muted. So if you're trying to tell me right now that I have a stain on my shirt or I have something in my teeth, I can't hear you. However, there is a small button at the bottom of your screen that says Q&A. You should be able to push that button and then send us a question at any time during this presentation. And then at the end of the presentation, we will have time to answer questions that you submit to us. So about Decisive Data. We are an end-to-end business analytics consultancy, and we are located in Redmond, Washington, and we have 90 people on our team. Data analytics is our sole technical and consulting focus. And what this means is that all the projects that we do here in-house have to do with data analytics. We don't accept any other type of work. We do work remote or virtually here on site, or we can deploy consultants to your location as well. So full scope of data analytics work, that means we specialize in data science, we specialize in data visualization, and anything that has to do with the data platform. Our mission is to make sure that all decisions made in your organizations are informed by data. So if you have a project that fits underneath that scope of work, us, over the last 10 years, we've had experience working on data projects. So let me find out how I change my slide. Oh, tab. Oh, tab. Give me 2 seconds. Oop. Ah, there we go. There's our logo. The other thing that I wanted to mention is that we surround ourselves with the best in breed in data analytics technology. So what I'll point out on this slide is that we are a Tableau Gold partner. That means that over the last year, we've touched over $1 million in licensing fees. And across the globe, we are a top 3 systems integrator for Tableau. The case study that I'd like to talk to you guys about today is the work that we've done with Merrill Gardens. We've worked side by side with Merrill Gardens for about 4.5 years now. That's about half a decade. We also have other senior and assisted living clients on our client list as well. With this data project, we extracted data from Yardi, and we also extracted data from Kronos, merged them together in order to power the data visualizations that you're going to see here today. It's important to understand that the data visualizations that you'll see today are built on a fake Yardi data model. The majority of our clients use Yardi as a senior living housing management system. And that's a data collection system that comes in. If you are using a different data platform to collect your data, we can work with that as well. But in this case study, I'll be sure to email it out to you after the webinar too. We will be attending the Senior Living Executive Conference this year, May 14th to 16th in San Diego. If you have plans on attending as well, let us know. Just send me a question or send me a communication through the Q&A. We would love to make time to visit you on the exhibit hall, or just find some time to talk about your data needs during there. The presenters for the day, myself, you can see that since that headshot was taken, I have had a haircut, thank goodness. Hunter Barrett is going to be our data artist. He's going to be doing the majority of the presenting. Hunter has worked side by side with Merrill Gardens and our other senior living clients to build their data visualizations. And all the best practices that we have taken from those projects are really his brainchild. So he has a lot of experience working with senior living organizations. Also, we have Tully Lanter. Tully is one of our data specialists. He is not going to be presenting here today, but he's with us, and he has hand-on-hand experience taking the data out of Yardi, transforming it, and then he has a lot of experience working with the senior living data sets. And so he's going to join us at the question and answering portion of this webinar. And so if you have any data questions, if you've been trying to build dashboards, if you've been trying to transform your own data, send them to us through the question system, and we'll make sure that we're going to address them at the end of the webinar. So with that being said, I am going to switch the controls over to Hunter, and he is going to take you through our content for the next 20 or 30 minutes or so. And here we go. And I'm going to allow him to share his screen here in a minute.
I think it might be sharing. I think we might be set.
Okay.
Great. So thanks, Gabe. That was a great introduction. I'm really excited to be here to talk about these tools specifically. As Gabe mentioned, what we're going to share with you today, and specifically the three dashboards that we're going to be covering, really represent a culmination of knowledge that myself and other members of the Decisive Data team have accumulated over the years in working with senior living clients. So I'm really excited to share that insight. In order to kind of frame up this conversation and help you understand what inspired these tools, I want to give a little bit of context into the nuts and bolts and really the individuals who make up the kinds of senior living clients that we've worked with to date. And so to do that, I want to introduce you to three members of a given senior living community. Names have been anonymized for obvious reasons, but sufficient to say that these personas or roles that exist at senior living clients really helped us sculpt and design the kinds of analytics tools that we make. So the first person I want to introduce you to is Tessa, and Tessa is an executive. The next person is Patty. Patty works very closely with Tessa, and she acts as a general manager. And finally, we have Andrew. And Andrew works as a sales manager for this given senior living company. And he has a geographic assignment within the group. And so these three individuals, much like you on the webinar, experience kind of a basic truth in your job. And that is that data plays a key role in helping organizations make informed decisions. And that's really what we're focused on here at Decisive Data. And as we think specifically about the tools that we create for those who work in the senior living space, we're always asking ourselves one big question, which is, what do people need from their analytics tool? And so I'm hoping that by kind of framing this conversation with these three individuals, we can very specifically and accurately answer that question. So if we think about Tessa first, who is an executive, My experience tells me that these folks are mostly focused on maximizing revenue. And what that means is that from an analytics tool perspective, what Tessa and other executives might be focused on are all company and community level analysis. The other thing is Tessa, when she looks at a given analytics tool, she specifically wants to identify a specific community, perhaps a building for those who work in commercial real estate, that represents analytics opportunity, maybe one that isn't maximizing their full rent revenue potential or occupancy potential. And finally, many executives are interested in adjusting occupancy targets and then evaluating how communities are performing against those, or how a company as a whole is performing against a given target. Now, general managers have a similar goal and share a lot of focus as executives in that they're interested in revenue. But Patty, as a general manager, is really going to be interested and mainly responsible for identifying specific revenue opportunities as they exist within a specific community or communities that she manages. What this means is Patty is going to be interested in community level analysis across key metrics. And specifically, she's going to be looking to identify specific units and care levels that represent a revenue opportunity. Patty is also going to be interested in setting occupancy targets and comparing them to how rent revenue actuals are playing out. So that kind of gives us an overview of this revenue piece with Tessa as an executive and Patty as a general manager. And as we start thinking about Andrew and his role to the organization as a sales manager, things begin to look a little bit different because Andrew is looking to really optimize their sales pipeline. And what that means is that he's looking at sales targets and how they compare to actuals as performed by a sales team. He's looking to gain visibility into how sales activity is moving along a pipeline, where are prospects getting stuck. And finally, he's looking to identify specific prospects that need further sales engagement. Who are those prospects that were perhaps hot 3 months ago and haven't been contacted since? And how can we help that person better understand the value that we're offering and really convert that person into a deposit and move-in? So with that kind of framework, I want to jump into the tools so that we can better see and really paint a tangible picture around what these tools can do for people like Tessa, Patty, and Andrew. The first thing I want to mention as well is these are available on the Tableau public site under the Decisive Data profile. So I'd encourage anyone with further questions or just interest in checking these dashboards out to do that after the webinar. So the first thing that you'll notice here is that this dashboard is titled the Senior Living Executive Rent View. And that it's titled that way because it's targeting people like Tessa, people who care about all company and community level analysis. So when we look at this, we can see at a glance, we are providing Tessa with all sorts of relevant metrics to really getting a good idea about how the company as a whole is doing in terms of vacancy opportunity as well as rent revenue opportunity. The thing that I want to mention first and foremost is at the top part of this visualization in the far right corner, we have a occupancy revenue target set at 92%. This field can be dynamically changed. So for example, if Tessa as an executive wanted to increase that target from 92 to 94, she can enter 94 and we can see that the dashboard will display changes in accordance with that new threshold. We can see that more properties are missing the 94% target than we're missing the 92 target, which makes sense since we increased it. Let's say that Tessa wanted to decrease it from 92 to 90. We can put in 90 into the occupied revenue percent target field. As we press enter, we can see the dashboard change again dynamically to see that only 2 communities near the bottom are highlighted in blue, meaning that those are the 2 that are missing that target. As we see here, as I mentioned, we have kind of this vacancy section where Tessa can evaluate what opportunities for revenue increase might look like on this side. And the thing that we're really bringing to light here is the dollars associated with the vacant units at the company. The reason that we're highlighting this measure is because nothing will kind of kill a bottom line of revenue more than having a vacant unit that just sits empty for long periods of time. And we know that there's an opportunity cost associated with not collecting that revenue, because there are market rates associated with units should they be full. So one of the things we do in this dashboard is really highlight the fact, again, in blue, and bringing this to the front of Tessa's analysis and saying there are 26 units that are vacant, and those units represent $5.43 million. As we move down, Tessa has the opportunity to look at this occupancy measure over time. And if she's interested instead at looking at vacancy over time, she can use this radio button to the right of the trend line to dynamically change that visualization. And what we see now is vacancy over time. A further useful portion or a useful feature, I guess, of this dashboard is that Tessa might want to get more specific. So instead of looking at the last 12 months of time, or perhaps a year-to-date view, Tessa can actually go in and click and drag over these 4 months. We can select these 4 months, and we can see the entire dashboard changes dynamically to show data that is relevant just to that time period. What's really interesting here is as Tessa, as any executive, gets more detailed with their analysis in a dashboard like this, they begin to position themselves better to recognize revenue opportunities. And we can see that the Las Vacas community in this lower bar chart has the most revenue opportunity, specifically as we move to this bar on the far right side. We can see that in the last 4 months, the Las Vacas community has about $100,000 of revenue associated with vacant units. Tessa, more likely than not, will want to see this in a bit more detail, and she can do so by hovering over this bar and seeing how that trend looks, how that vacancy trend looks for Las Vacas over time. She also has access to some of the other key measures, including the market rate, the actual rate, and the difference between those two. As an executive, Tessa might not have the time to necessarily drill into all the specifics associated with what's going on with Las Vacas or where that revenue opportunity might lie. But we can see that in this tooltip, we're giving her easy access to both the email and phone number of the general manager of that community so that Tessa can reach out and quickly action a plan and begin a conversation around how the company might collect the revenue, or at least improve their ability to capitalize on units that are currently vacant. So I want to shift now from talking about Tessa to talking about Patty. So if Patty were to see a view like this, she might think, uh-oh, Las Vacas, my community, is on the hot seat. And she gains some insight because she might be interested in seeing how the Las Vacas community compares against the New Dublin community or the Somerville community, which lies kind of in its same group in terms of how much money that they're bringing in. But more likely than not, Patty is going to want to take a deeper dive to understand more specifically what's going on at Las Vacas. And from this view, Patty has that opportunity. If Patty were to select this bar, we can see in the hover over, she not only gets a high level metric overview of what's happening at the Las Vacas community, but she can also click this link which says drill into Las Vacas community. And by selecting that, Patty is actually taken to a completely new dashboard. And what we'll see is that Patty can dig into more specifics around where revenue opportunity might exist at the community and gain more, I guess, specific information that someone like Tessa might not be interested in seeing. So when we look at the senior living GM rent view, which we're now looking at, we see a lot of the same metrics coming through, but there's one important difference between this dashboard and the dashboard that we saw before. And that is, as we can see in the upper right, that this dashboard is showing data for only the Las Bacchus community. We can also see that Patty has the opportunity to shift around this revenue target to see how specific units and care levels are comparing against it. That's another really important difference between this dashboard and the last. If we look down at the bottom of this dashboard at the specific, specifically at the visualization with bars, we can see that instead of looking at communities, we're actually looking at care levels to the far left and unit types at a given community. So much like Tessa's analysis, Patty is also has the ability to, for example, select the last 4 months of this time period. And when she does that, you can see this dashboard again, it changes fully and dynamically so that Patty can look specifically at just the data relevant to a more recent time period. One of the really interesting things that Patty can do here is not only be told that there is about $100,000 worth of revenue associated with, in this case, vacant units, but below in this bar chart again, she's getting a breakdown of how are those dollars distributed in this community and what is the actual vacant potential revenue associated with those unit types and care levels. This filter on the far left will also be useful for someone like Patty who can select to rank these unit types by vacant total revenue or vacant potential revenue. And she can see that the companion suite memory care unit type and care level are the ones that show the most opportunity if these units were to be filled. If Patty hovers over, again, this far right bar, we can see that there's about a little over $40,000 associated with this specific unit type and care level. And she can see that in the last 4 months, that the vacancy has actually decreased over time after a pretty significant spike in September. So this data point and the analysis of looking at this, the easy access that Patty has to this trend can help her explain to Tessa and kind of fill in the story of what is happening with vacancy, not only for this community as a whole, but also for this unit type and care level specifically. So now what I want to do is shift to Andrew's view. And we talked about how Andrew's goals and objectives with data and his contribution to the organization is slightly different than that of Tessa and Patty. And because of that, we have a completely different dashboard that helps Andrew gain analysis into specifically the sales pipeline. And if we look at this dashboard specifically, we can see it looks and feels a bit different than that of Tessa and Patty's dashboard. One of the things that you'll see here, and maybe one of the things that comes to mind the most or kind of in the forefront of your mind, is that these boxes on the top of the dashboard help us follow prospects through a sales pipeline, from the time that they become a prospect until the time that they move in. And so we can see that we, as a company as a whole, which is what we're looking at now, there's about just shy of 3,500 prospects. And we can see what happens to those prospects as we move into calls, tours, deposits, and move-ins. One thing that Andrew can do as a sales manager is not only look at this as a whole for the entire company, but he can actually select a region that he is assigned to. So let's say that Andrew is the manager of the Northeast group. He can go to the select a group dropdown and select Northeast. And what we'll see is that the entire dashboard changes dynamically to show just data that's relevant to him. Now, we can see that this bar chart on the bottom left got a lot shorter. And that's because we're showing just those communities that are relevant to Andrew's group, as opposed to all of the communities that exist in the company. We can also see that these values became a lot shorter or a lot smaller as we're looking at the total prospects over like a week by week period. And if we go back to showing, in fact, all groups, we can see those numbers increase. And again, a full list of communities for the entire company come through on that left side. So let's go back to our Northeast region. And specifically, I want to perhaps drill into a different part of this pipeline. So right now we're looking at all of the Northeast communities. And we're looking at the number of prospects that have come in the last 2 months, as indicated by this, this date filter on the top kind of right part of our screen. Perhaps though, Andrew wants to look at tours specifically. What he can do is use this drop down to say, I want to look at tours and look at how that volume looks over time for these communities that are in my area. We can see that this bar chart on the left looks a little different. And that is because a number of the bars show up red. Red indicates that a community is not hitting their target or their percent target for tours for calls as they move into tours. And Andrew, as a sales manager, actually has the opportunity to change these targets. And if he goes into the set conversion percent target on the top right, he can see this light box come through that gives him the opportunity to adjust these targets. So right now we are looking at 3 different boxes. They're associated with the last 3 portions of the sales pipeline. So this percent says that as a target, we want 11% of our calls to take a tour, but perhaps Andrew wants to increase that to 15%. He can do so and press enter. We can see in the background, our dashboard is already changing dynamically to reflect this threshold. Andrew can also change the tour to deposit conversion target from 25% to, for example, 20, and he can press enter. Now, this last box looks specifically at deposits to move-ins, and generally speaking, at most organizations, in my experience, their target here is always 100% because those who make deposits generally are those who are committed to moving in. Once those targets are set, Andrew can go ahead and select the X here and head out, and he can actually go through and move through the different sales stages. For example, he can select deposits and see that our target is actually referencing our red and gray colors here are actually referencing the threshold that we just plugged in. And we can see that there are 2 communities specifically that are below their percent targets for that tours to deposits step of the sales pipeline. After identifying these 2, Andrew can go to the community filter and select one of those 2. So let's say that Andrew wants to look at the Big Apple community specifically. After we make that selection in that select a community dropdown, we can see again that we're getting increasingly granular information and data that's specific to selections that we make. This is providing Andrew with incredible flexibility and insight into just a single community. And we can see that represented across the board on this dashboard. So the Big Apple community specifically in the last 2 months has had 50 prospects. The sales team for that community has made 675 calls to those 50 prospects. 39 of those calls have taken tours. 6 of those 39 have made deposits, and 6 of those 6 have moved in. Now, what Andrew can do here as a kind of one more step to better understand how people or why salespeople might be missing this target is he can select this checkbox and actually see the 6 that we're referring to. So specifically in the tours to deposits move-in where we're missing that target, Andrew can identify prospects that are relevant to that step, those that might not be making the move from a tour to a deposit. And what he can do, here we have prospect IDs coded in, but given the correct data configuration, we can add in information about specific prospects and get extremely actionable insight here to salespeople as they look at who is getting stuck in the pipeline and have very specific direction about who they can contact and about what. So with that, I'm going to, that kind of wraps up our conversations around these dashboards. So I'm going to go ahead and transfer the controls back to Gabe, who's going to take it from there.
Perfect. Thank you, Hunter.
You bet.
Great. Thanks for that presentation. I think it's absolutely amazing to see what we can do with data. and the types of decisions that you can make off of it. The big highlights for me, the big takeaways from what he just went over are this amount of speed and time it takes to analyze revenue over the entire organization, and how you can drill down into every single property to find out exactly the type of decision that has to be made to increase occupancy revenue. Get all the data that we have seen there is our client's data, or from that fake data model that we've used to transform to power those dashboards. I am going to share my desktop with you, and the next slide is our iconic picture of an iceberg. We've seen this before, and it's a great visualization because the dashboards that you just saw are the top of the iceberg, is the tip of the iceberg. Everything underneath that tip of the iceberg is all the data work that has to go on in order to supply those drill down metrics, making sure that they're organized properly. I don't do that type of work. Tolly does that type of work. And I'm going to pull him over here now and introduce you. But before I do that, I would like to introduce you to Andrew Boyd. Andrew's one of our account executives here, and he will be communicating with you afterwards to set up times. He's your liaison, he's your expediter, if you will, to access our data experts or our data visualizations to get your questions answered. So let me introduce Tully. If you want to come up.
You bet.
And all right, so Tully, let me find. Wait for everybody to say hi.
Hey there.
Isn't this fun?
Sure is. Appreciate the intro, Gabe.
Yeah, no worries. Okay, so question coming in. Is the data pulling directly from Yardi to power the dashboards?
It's a great question. We find Yardi's got a very, very large data model. There's, off the top of my head, about 1,500 tables in the application. That's a heck of a lot more than we need. So what we do is we take the several dozen that are relevant and combine them into a conformed data model that's going to be more conducive to the sort of reporting views that we need to build just for ease of use, and also that Tableau really likes to consume and will work well with. So I guess to answer that question in a nutshell, there's one intermediate step, which is an organized data model that sits in between the Yardi source and the Tableau output.
Great. Thank you for that.
Sure.
Another question that we're taking a look at here is the data real-time data, and how often does the data refresh on the dashboards?
In theory, it can be as frequent as your application provides the data. So with Yardi specifically, what we've often seen is that the vendor will provide one fresh copy of the data every night. So in that case, we're constrained to a single daily refresh. But with other Yardi data architecture, also perhaps with other applications, that could be, gosh, every 6 hours, every 1 hour, perhaps even faster. It's really up to the application vendor's constraints.
Awesome. So almost real time, 24 hours, data refreshes on your dashboards if you're using Yardi, and if you have a different type of system, that will be dependent on that type of system. Which brings us into our last question, and I'm going to summarize this. We use a homegrown system. Using a homegrown system, can we still connect to Tableau, or can you build these types of dashboards using a homegrown system?
Yeah,
that's a challenge.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, it's going to take a different approach, maybe a less uniform approach than we need to use with Yardi, because it's a standard model that we know very, very well at this point. But as long as there are folks who can guide us on the business logic for this one-off system, then it can absolutely be built into a nice data model that's conducive to nice Tableau reporting.
Yeah, great. I'm going to expand on that with one more question. So if you have the data model and you have the data coming in, the dashboards that Hunter just displayed to us they have all of our best practices in our layouts.
Right.
And these can be configured towards their unique logic as well. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. We try to keep all the business logic kind of hidden away by a couple levels from the end user. Because if you're just trying to figure out, what's my occupancy rate, you're probably not deeply interested in all the steps and transformations that it took to get there. So whether it's Yardi itself, like we've rolled out several times, or whether it's a completely new homegrown system, all that business logic will live usually in a SQL Server database or in a cloud data warehouse or something that end users can access, but don't need any deep business or technical knowledge of in order to actually get at the visuals.
Thank you.
You bet.
Great. I have one more question. Just came in. What would you say is the biggest differentiator? Excuse me. Between your architecture and dashboards on the Yardi platform, the Yardi Orion platform. So how are our dashboards different than what's found already in the Yardi platform?
Yeah, so I can speak to the architecture portion real quickly. Since we take, like I was mentioning earlier, scores of the Yardi application tables and turn them into what we would term a conformed data mart, it's going to be a little more conducive to integrating with other applications that might also be important. Employee timekeeping is one of the more common ones we've seen. And I'll let Hunter speak to the dashboard differentiation.
Sure. So one of the things that I've heard over and over again from folks who use Yardi specifically is the kind of inability to compare two metrics that might live in totally different places in the many tables that Toli mentioned together right next to each other in the same viz. And so one of the things that we're able to do, and one of the things that we saw in this dashboard specifically, was provide Tessa, Patty, the ability rather to see a single dashboard that looks not only at occupancy but also not only at occupancy but also revenue, just like in the same view. So that's one of those things where, again, my understanding of Yardi is such that you would have to go kind of down a rabbit trail to get occupancy and then another rabbit trail to get rent revenue. And if you wanted to consistently compare those two metrics in the same visualization in a quick and automated fashion, our reports provide that in a way that Yardi cannot. The other thing that I will say is by setting up kind of the Yardi-centered data in the way that we would need to put together a Tableau dashboard, you're also opening up a lot of other analytics doors to compare against timekeeping and like other types of data that you might have, including, like I said, timekeeping or like assessment data that's associated with resident acuity. So I think those are good things to keep in mind when you're kind of comparing the two. Ultimately, I think the reporting that we provide is not only more robust for the reasons I just mentioned, but it also better represents a lot of the best practices that exist around data visualization and visual communication with data.
Cool. Great. Thanks, Hunter. It was a really great description. Without any other questions coming in, I think that concludes our webinar for the day. The last thing I'll send a reminder is if you're going to be at the Senior Living Executive Conference in May, we would love to talk with you. We'd love to schedule some time and talk to you about these dashboards and find out how you're using data analytics in your enterprise. If you have any questions, Andrew Boyd is your guy. He is going to be reaching out to you after this, but feel free to contact us as well. And I will be sharing a copy of this webinar along with our Maryland Gardens case study by the end of the day. So thank you very much. We hope you have a great week, and thank you for joining us.